Leadership literature is filled with fluffy, superficial content that lacks substance and scientific rigor. Sense of leadership research refers to common theoretical, methodological, and interpretation errors that compromise the integrity, reliability, and applicability of leadership research findings. In my previous videos, I introduced sin number 1, conflating behavior with perception. Sin number 2, circular reasoning. Sin number 3, mislabeling leadership. Sin number 4, lack of problematization. Today, I'll discuss sin number 5, lack of falsification in leadership research. Let's start by understanding what falsification means. The principle of falsifiability is proposed by philosopher Karl Popper, who states that for a theory to be considered scientific, it must be possible for an empirical scientific system to be refuted by experience. What does it mean? It means that a good theory or a theoretical statement should be constructed in a way that allows for the possibility of being proven wrong through observation or experiments. For example, a theory states left-handed individuals are more creative than right-handed individuals. And this is a falsifiable statement because it can be tested by comparing the creativity levels of left-handed individuals and right-handed individuals through different creativity evaluations. If we find that right-handed individuals score equally or higher on creativity measures than left-handed individuals, it would falsify the statement that left-handed individuals are more creative than right-handed individuals. Here is an example in the leadership research context. A theoretical statement says all effective leaders are open-minded. This is a falsifiable statement because we can test it by observing close-minded leaders who are also effective. If we find even one close-minded leader who is also effective, it will falsify the theoretical statement that all effective leaders are open-minded. Why is falsification important? First, when leadership theories are falsifiable, they can be refined and replaced as new evidence emerges. This ongoing process of testing and refining theories helps develop more accurate and effective leadership models over time. Second, falsifiability helps prevent leaders and practitioners from only seeking out evidence that supports their preconceived notions about leadership. By considering the possibility of disconfirmation, the research process becomes more balanced and does not fall into the trap of confirmation bias. Third, leadership theories that are grounded in falsifiable research are more likely to produce reliable and actionable insights for leaders in practice. This makes the findings of leadership research more valuable for real-world applications because they are based on robust and tested principles. What happens when theories cannot be falsified? If theories or theoretical statements cannot be empirically tested and are potentially disproven, then the theories become immune to empirical scrutiny. This lack of scrutiny undermines the scientific validity of the theories because they cannot be objectively evaluated or challenged. Without the possibility of falsification, those theories risk becoming dogmatic. They rely on anecdotal evidence or untestable assumptions rather than on rigorous evidence-based research. And this is exactly the problem we have in leadership research. Let's consider transformational leadership as an example. This popular theory suggests that leaders can transform their followers through 4 dimensions of behavior: individualized consideration, intellectual stimulation, idealized influence, also known as charisma, and inspiration. First, individualized consideration. It means that leaders show personalized attention to each follower's needs. The leader acts as a coach or mentor. They recognize and address individual differences among followers, providing tailored support and development opportunities. For example, a leader may offer actual training to a team member who needs help with a particular skill, or provide flexible working arrangement to accommodate personal circumstances. Second, intellectual stimulation. It means that leaders encourage followers to think critically, challenge assumptions, and explore new ideas. They create an environment where creativity and innovations are valued and where followers are motivated to find novel solutions to problems. For example, a leader may facilitate brainstorming sessions, encourage questioning the status quo, or support employees in pursuing experimental projects. Third, idealized influence. It means that leaders act as role models and earn the respect and trust of their followers through their ethical behaviors, integrity, and commitment to organizational values. They inspire admiration and emulation by consistently demonstrating the behaviors and attitudes they expect from others. For example, a leader who remains calm under pressure and upholds fairness and transparency in decision-making exemplifies idealized influence. Fourth, inspiration. It means that leaders articulate a compelling vision of the future that motivates and energizes followers. They communicate this vision with enthusiasm and confidence and instill a sense of purpose and direction. Inspirational leaders use storytelling, vivid language, and emotional appeals to connect with followers on a deeper level and encourage them to strive towards shared goals with passion and commitment. This transformational leadership theory sounds very appealing, right? Do you see the problem here? It's very challenging to falsify this theory and prove the theory wrong. Why? Transformational leadership theory is so encompassing, so broad, that almost any positive leadership behavior can be characterized under one of those four dimensions. There is no clear specification of how each dimension uniquely influences outcomes. The theory does not clearly state what would constitute evidence against it. What are the consequences of the lack of falsifiability in leadership research? Since the theory cannot be disproven or falsified, our understanding of leadership does not progress. We cling to those unfalsifiable theories and allow them to persist unchallenged, which leads to the perpetuation of ineffective or even harmful leadership practices. Let me describe an instance to you, and you let me know if you've ever encountered the same thing in your professional settings. Abby is a salesperson or a consultant or your supervisor. Abby is promoting a program or a practice. Let's call it Program X. In the field of education, it can be those buzzword programs: social emotional learning, culturally responsive pedagogy, growth mindset, trauma-informed practices, mindfulness in education, etc., etc., etc. After a year of implementing the program, you find that some departments have improved performance, while others have not. For successful departments, Abby says, you see, Program X really works. For unsuccessful departments, Abby says, the people here did not implement Program X correctly. In education, there is a saying that you didn't implement the program with integrity and fidelity. But what does that really mean? Integrity and fidelity are just big words without specific meaning because they often lack clear, measurable criteria that define what correct implementation looks like in practice. This ambiguity makes it impossible to empirically test whether the program itself is effective or its success is merely attributed to subjective interpretation of implementation. In essence, the term of implementation with integrity and fidelity can be used to deflect criticism or failure. by placing the blame on those implementing the program rather than on the program itself. This is a classic example of the problem of the lack of falsifiability. No matter the outcomes, the program cannot be disproven. As a leader, you are left with no clear understanding of what truly drove the success or failures. It is difficult for you to make informed decisions or improvements going forward. Another example of the lack of falsification in leadership research is organizational culture. Organizational culture is defined as the shared values, beliefs, norms, and behaviors that characterize an organization. This definition is so broad that it is difficult to prove it's wrong. Why? When organizational culture covers a wide range of factors, it can be interpreted to fit almost any narrative. When organizations succeed, a strong and positive culture is frequently credited as a key driver of success. When organizations fail, the blame often falls on a poor or dysfunctional culture. This broad nature of organizational culture makes it difficult to falsify because, given its all-encompassing definition, it inevitably has an impact on whatever outcome you are examining, rendering organizational culture resistant to disproof and consequently less scientifically rigorous. In addition to catch-all constructs and theories in leadership, another reason for the lack of falsifiability is the prevalence of normative arguments in leadership research literature. Normative arguments are statements about how things ought to be, rather than descriptions of how things actually are. For example, the claim, schools should actively work to dismantle racism, is a normative statement. It expresses a value judgment about what schools ought to do, rather than an empirical observation of what schools currently do. Normative arguments are common in leadership research literature because leadership is inherently tied to values, ethics, and visions for the future. Statements like leaders should empower their teams or leaders should communicate effectively reflect ideals that many aspire to achieve. But those statements are not easily subjected to empirical testing or falsification. Unlike descriptive claims, which can be tested against observable data, normative claims are based on principles and ethical considerations that are not directly measurable or disprovable. For example, if a theory states that effective leaders should always act with integrity, this is a normative claim about how leaders ought to behave. Even if we find examples of successful leaders who sometimes behave opportunistically rather than with integrity, the normative claim itself remains intact because it is based on an ethical standard rather than an empirical one. The challenge with normative arguments in leadership research is that while they provide important guidance and reflect aspirational goals, they are not falsifiable in the same way as descriptive claims. This makes it difficult to rigorously test their validity using scientific methods. As a result, leadership theories grounded in normative ideas often resist empirical scrutiny. If you read the literature on ethical leadership, moral leadership, and other value-based theories, you will encounter many normative claims, statements about what leaders ought to do based on moral or value-driven principles. For example, ethical leadership theory states that leaders should act with honesty and integrity. This statement is undeniably correct, and it is tough to disapprove precisely because it is a statement of what it should be rather than what actually is. When a leader fails while claiming to follow ethical principles, the failure is often attributed to the leader's lack of true adherence to those ethical principles. We say the leader talks the talk but doesn't walk the walk. We label the leader a hypocrite. However, we rarely scrutinize the ethical leadership theory itself for any flaws. When was the last time you read an empirical article that reported empirical tests that challenged the validity of the theory of ethical leadership? Now, don't get me wrong. Ethics, morality, and values are important, but from the standpoint of scientific rigor, the normative claims in leadership literature are difficult to falsify. This difficulty in falsification undermines the scientific rigor of those theories. So, how can we, as leadership practitioners and researchers, redeem this sin of lack of falsification? I'd like to propose 2 strategies that can help us move towards more rigorous and effective leadership theories and practices. The first strategy is to demand the boundary specification of a theory. This means asking not just what a leadership theory predicts will happen, but also what it predicts will not happen. This helps establish the theory's boundaries and makes it more falsifiable. If a theory claims that a certain leadership style increases team creativity, we should also ask, are there any situations whether this style may not increase creativity or may even decrease creativity? In doing so, we create more opportunities for meaningful empirical testing and refinement of our leadership theory. This leads us to our second strategy: look for anomalies. Anomalies are instances where a theory's predictions do not align with observed outcomes. By actively seeking out and investigating those exceptions, we challenge the theory's assumptions and identify areas where it may need to be revised, refined, or abandoned. If a leadership theory predicts that transformational leadership will always lead to high employee engagement, but we find cases where transformational leadership results in employee disengagement, we need to closely examine those anomalies. Understanding why the theory fails in those contexts can provide critical insights that refine our understanding of leadership and help develop more robust leadership theories. Remember, the goal of leadership research is not to prove that our existing leadership theories are correct, but to continuously test, refine, and improve them. This scientific approach to leadership research may be very challenging, but it is essential for truly effective and evidence leadership in our complex and ever-changing world. Leadership practices should not be based on untested dogma or unfalsifiable theories. They must be rooted in rigorous scientific research that acknowledges its own limitations and constantly strive for improvement. After all theories are wrong, but some theories are less wrong. By redeeming the sin of the lack of falsification, we can remove those unfalsifiable, always right statements by applying scientific rigor to leadership research, which then translates into effective and reliable leadership practices.